Welcome to Is This a Great Game or What? And our special guest today is Hall of Fame broadcaster and my dear friend, Eric Nadel. Eric, meet Jeff Kurkjian. You haven't seen him since he was like 4 feet tall, which was 2 weeks ago. But say hi to Jeff after all these years.
Hi, Jeff. How tall are you now, Jeff?
I'm a whopping 5'6.5", which is considered a giant in the Kurkjian family.
Right. So, Eric, let's start from the top here. You signed in for this podcast as Jeff Stone, one of my all-time favorite players. Explain the thinking there.
I just knew he's one of your all-time favorite players. I was trying to think of the name that would amuse you the most. And that's I consider Jeff Bronchi because he was born in Afghanistan. And right. I believe he's the only major leaguer from Afghanistan. But I figured I had to go with Jeff Stone because of how many good quotes he gave you over the years.
Yeah, Jeff Stone is one of the sweetest men I've ever met. He was a good baseball player, but he was much better in the minor leagues than the big leagues. But he's the guy who grew up in a cornfield in Missouri and ends up in Oregon for his first year in pro ball. And he's standing in the outfield during a pitching change, and he asks the right fielder, is that the same moon that they have at home? That's the question that Jeff Stone asked the right fielder. But he was, and Eric, I'm right about him, right? He was absolutely as friendly and as nice a guy as you've ever met, right?
He was outwardly friendly, and he was really fast. Right. He didn't have all the skills you needed to be a major league player, but he was really fast.
Jeff, he played winter ball in Mexico and bought a television there and then left it in Mexico when he came back to the States. And they said, why didn't you bring the TV back? And he said, well, I didn't think it would get the stations here in this country. So he left it in Mexico. And I repeat, it sounds mean-spirited. I'm not. This is Jeff Stone, sweet, sweet guy, and one of my favorite guys I ever covered. Sorry about that.
That thing about the same moon, they made a movie called La Misma Luna, which means the same moon. And it's about a woman who immigrates to the United States and leaves her child behind, but points at the moon before she leaves and says every night, look at the moon and know that I'm looking at the same moon, and that will bond us together. And I've seen the movie a couple of times. It's a really sweet movie. But every time I see the name of the movie, I think of Jeff Stone.
Oh, it's so good.
That's
and
incredible.
Speaking of movies, when I first off, the house that you were born in, or after you were born, the house you went to was like 300 yards from Eric Nadel's house. He was the one that told me, Tim, there's a house on our street, or it's one street over. You should buy that house. And then we did. We bought that house. So I got through my early years in Texas because of Eric. He told me what to do there. Eric, you remember finding the house for us, right?
Absolutely. And, when I'd walk by that house, walking the dog, every time I'd see it, I think of you guys there, and I would think of Dunk sitting in that car all day.
Oh, God. Well,
was just completely trashed.
We need to explain. We had a dog, Dunky, the greatest dog ever. All he wanted to do was go in the car. And there were certain days he would just get in the car knowing this is going to leave for the park at some point, and I don't want to miss it. So, yes, Eric was not the only guy to see our dog sitting in the car. He had in and out privileges. We weren't locking him in there. He chose to do this. Oh, my gosh. The things we were...
Eric, there's so much history between the two of you. First of all, it is really neat to be on the call with two Hall of Famers. So I have to say, this is a real treat for myself and for our incredible listeners. But let's take it back because, Dad, you started with the Rangers in what year?
I started in 82. I covered baseball for 3 years before that in Baltimore. But as Eric knows, you really don't start your baseball career until you're the play-by-play guy or the beat guy. And I became the beat guy for the Texas Rangers in 1982. And Eric, those players, that team, what What a learning experience that was for all of us. You had the same experiences when you took over in 1979. Agreed?
Agreed. Yeah, I was 27 years old. Most of the players on our team were older than me then. We had Fergie Jenkins and Doc Medich and Richie Zisk and Al Oliver, and all of these guys were older than I was. And now most of the players could be my grandkids, but it was very different back then. And back then the players saw us, the people who were there every day covering them, as part of the family. We really were all part of the same group, and there was a communal feeling about it that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. Also, there were a lot more characters back then. There wasn't as much money involved. Players weren't as dedicated as they are now, and a lot more funny stuff happened back then than does now.
Yeah, I've told this story many times, Eric, but my first spring training with the Rangers, after 3 weeks, Mickey Rivers came up to me and said, "Tim, can I borrow $2,000?" And I had to say, "Mickey, I make $11,000 a year. I don't have $2,000 to loan you." Does that sound like Mickey to you, Eric?
Absolutely. Yeah, what a team we had then, and what a season too. To start out as contenders, they traded Al Oliver in spring training and got Larry Parrish and Dave Hostetler. They made that ridiculous trade to get Lee Mazzilli, where they traded Ron Darling and Walt Terrell to get Lee Mazzilli when they already had 2 center fielders. They traded for another one, and Mazzilli was not exactly pleased to play left field. Right? He said it was an idiot's position.
Yes, he did. Oh my gosh. Carl Yastrzemski did not take that well, by the way, who was still playing at the time.
Yeah, he didn't care. I remember Jim Rice didn't quite care for that either. And the whole season went kaput in early May when they lost 12 games in a row. They went on a road trip. They lost every game. If I remember correctly, on one road trip to Detroit and Boston, they lost a game in each place when they could have ended the game with a double play. And instead, the second baseman got taken out, threw the ball away, and they lost the game on that same play. I think it happened to Doug Flynn. And I think the other game was Bill Stein got taken out at second. One was by Kirk Gibson, and I don't remember who the Boston guy was who took out the second baseman. But we went from on the verge of winning to losing the game in one fell swoop.
Yeah, so that team in May, Eric said, lost 12 games in a row. And I staggered into Don Zimmer's office, and I have this haggard look on my face, and he looks at me and goes, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Well, Zim, I must tell you, it hasn't been as much fun covering this team as I thought it would be." And he looks at me, and I'm quoting here. He goes, "Quit complaining. Look at you. You're young. You're good looking. You got your whole life in front of you. Look at me. I'm old. I'm fat. I'm bald. I'm ugly. I got a plate in my head, and I've got this team to manage. I'm the one with all the worries. So quit complaining and recognize how lucky you are to be here." Now, Eric, does that not sound like Don Zimmer to you?
It sounds like Zim. And then he wasn't long for that team, as it turned out. Well, after that 12-game losing streak, they fired the general manager, not the manager. Right. They fired Eddie Robinson.
Right.
Right. And then later on in the year, in July, they fired Zim, but asked him to keep managing until they could find a replacement.
Jeff, he managed 3 games after being told you're fired. And then this is, Eric, I don't think you were here this night, but Zim took all the writers and all the coaches out to dinner to Mr. Catfish after it was finally over. He was officially fired. So I'm sitting there with the other beat writers, Jeff. This was incredible. And this guy who I've never seen before rolls in. He picks up a goblet of beer and throws it across the table at Jim Reeves, who I was sitting next to, one of the beat writers, and we have to get under the table so we don't get hit by a flying glass. And I looked at Rebo and I said, "Who was that?" He goes, "That's Brad Corbett. He used to own the teams." The owner of the team came in and threw a beer at Rebo. Does that sound like Brad Corbett to you, Eric?
Sounds like Brad Corbett. Brad Corbett is the reason that I got this job, because he was so impulsive. He was playing golf one day with Harmon Killebrew, And Harmon had done a little bit of broadcasting for the Twins. And Brad said, I'd like to have you as our TV announcer. And Harmon said, great, I'd love to do that. So Brad went to Roy Parks, who was running the broadcast department then. And it was actually the city of Arlington, not the Rangers or the radio station. And he said to Roy Parks, next year we're going to have Harmon Killebrew as our play-by-play announcer. And Roy said, well, no, we're not. I have an agreement with Channel 5 here that I have to use one of their sports guys as the play-by-play guy. And it happens to be Frank Lieber, and he's really good. And no, I'm not going to hire Harmon Killebrew. And Corbett said, well, if you won't hire Harmon Killebrew, then I won't let you use Ken Suarez as the color man on TV. Ken Suarez was a former Ranger player who worked for Corbett selling plastic pipe in Corbett's plastic pipe company. And Corbett would let him off work to go do the 30 games that we did on TV back then. And I was doing minor league hockey at the time. And Roy said, well, I'm sorry, I can't hire Harmon Killebrew. I can't break this contract. Corbett says, well, you can't use Ken Suarez anymore. And Roy said, all right, I'll find somebody else. I was that somebody else. And that's how I got the job.
Eric, I have never heard that story. Harmon Killebrew is one of my favorite people ever. But as a play-by-play guy, they were going to hire the big, stocky first baseman to be a play-by-play guy? That's ridiculous.
Exactly, as the TV play-by-play guy.
Some wireless plans can get a little bit crazy, a little bit off the charts expensive. Mint Mobile can get you started with 3 months of premium wireless for $15 a month. That's a pretty good number.
Who doesn't like that? The way gas prices are going up, Scott, we've got to keep our mobile plan down. And Mint Mobile is your location to keep your mobile plan down. You can add family members. You can do all that for just $15 a month.
That's less than a drink in many cities these days, if you like bougie drinks. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/territory. That's mintmobile.com/territory. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
You were doing women's basketball and minor league hockey, among other things, before you became the voice of the Rangers. Agreed?
Yeah. I mean, I thought, growing up in New York, listening to Marv Albert, I was just captivated by listening to New York Rangers games on the radio. I loved it. I got my homework done early every day the Rangers were playing so I could listen to Marv. And I would tell people say, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I'd say, I'm going to be the radio voice of the Rangers. And I met the New York Rangers. And, I broadcast hockey in college. And when I got out of college, I got a job in Muskegon, Michigan, at the lowest level of minor league sport. It was like the movie Slapshot. It really was like that.
Right.
In fact, we had the two guys. We had the Hanson brothers in our training camp. Their name was actually Carlson. We had them in our training camp.
The real Hanson brothers.
The real Hanson brothers before the movie, before any of that. And they didn't make our team. They didn't skate well enough to make our team. We were in the International Hockey League, which sounds really impressive, except that none of the teams were in any country other than the United States. And he was able to catch on with a team in the Eastern League, Jeff Carlson, and I don't remember what the name of the other brother was, but he caught on with the Eastern League and got jobs there. But I got a job in Muskegon, Michigan, then I got a job in Oklahoma City, and that saved my career because after 3 years in Muskegon, Michigan, I figured if I can't get in a better job than this, I probably really suck at this. And so I started applying to law schools. And then I heard that there was a job open in Oklahoma City. I read in the hockey news that a job had opened up in Oklahoma City, that the announcer there, John Brooks, had taken a job as the voice of the Oklahoma Sooners. And he was having to give up his job as the voice of the Oklahoma City Blazers. So I called up directory information for Oklahoma City and asked to talk to the general manager. And there was a guy named Ray Miron. And he says, the job's open. I'm the general manager. I'm also the coach. Send your stuff and I'll get back to you. And he got back to me in a few weeks and he said, you're one of 2 finalists for the job. And I want you to fly to Montreal for the hockey annual meetings. And I'll go to dinner with you one night and I'll go to dinner with the other finalist one night. And we'll see, who gets the job. So I got there, and the first night we go to dinner and he starts drinking before we even sat down. He ordered a drink at the hostess stand. And Eric, what would you like? So I just ordered whatever he ordered, which was a blonde Dubonnet. That's what he liked to drink before dinner, a blonde Dubonnet. So I'm drinking blonde Dubonnets with Ray, and we sit down and we have this fantastic meal with I don't know how many drinks, but I was just completely polluted by the end of it. But we had a great time. And I went back to my hotel room thinking, I did really well, I think. I might get this job. And then he says, I'm going to go out tomorrow night with the other finalist. And the next night, I get a call around midnight, and it's from Ray. And he says, hey, Eric, it's Ray. I just want to let you know you got the job. And I said, that's great. He says, but I've got this problem. He says, I don't know how to tell Mike Emrick that he didn't get the job. And all I could think of was, as far as I knew at the time, Mike Emrick didn't drink much, if at all. So if Ray was looking for a wingman when the team's on the road, he figured I'd be better than Mike Emrick because I can drink with him. And that's the only reason in the world I could possibly have ever gotten a job broadcasting hockey over Mike Emrick, who's like the Vin Scully of hockey broadcasting.
Oh my gosh.
Eric, that is unbelievable. I'd never heard that story before. Now, before I forget, Moose Lalo was where in he was the coach, Jeff. And tell us about Moose Lalo.
Moose Lala was the Yogi Berra of hockey. He would come out with these things called Mooseisms. Moose had grown up in Timmins, Ontario, an Italian family. One of his parents was French, French Canadian. So he spoke Italian and French before he learned English. And English was his third language. It was very distant third to the other two. So he would completely maul the language. He would say things like, this contract, this printer, he screwed us on the contract. Next time I'm going to sign the contract and you're going to sign the contract and we're going to take it to a Rotary Public. And we had a road trip to Iowa. It was the only place where you had to change your clocks for time zone, change your watches. We'd go from the Eastern time zone to the Central time zone to go to Des Moines. It was about an 8-hour bus ride, and we would do it late at night, and we were going to play the next day. And we get to Des Moines, it's the middle of the night, and we're about ready to get off the bus, and Moose gets up in the front of the bus, and he says, okay, now, tomorrow we got to skate at 10 a.m. I don't want anybody to be late because of this time zone thing. So everybody right now, okay, it's 4 a.m. right now. So everybody, let's just Simonize our watches. And it was something like that every day.
How about the guy who broke his leg? And what did Moose say after they took the X?
Yeah, well, they took X-rays, but it didn't help. He's still got a broken leg. And then my favorite one on New Year's Eve, the Muskegon Mohawks played this horrible game. They were terrible. And Moose came in after the game and he was really upset. And he said, okay, tomorrow we're having a practice. I know it's New Year's Day, but we're having a practice tomorrow. Everybody's got to be here at 11 a.m. And one guy piped up, is this compulsory? And Moose goes, no effing way. You've all got to be there.
So Eric, you went from that and you ended up in the Hall of Fame. This is one of the greatest journeys in the history of broadcasting. So let's go to the Hall of Fame, Eric. Explain what it was like when you got the call that you're going in. and then explain what it was like when you made your speech in front of all those people and went into the Hall of Fame at Cooperstown.
Yeah, the whole thing is just so crazy. I had been a finalist, I think 5 times before I actually won the award. So I thought I was probably going to be the Susan Lucci of the Ford Crick Award. But a few other guys have now gotten that distinction, I think. Jacques Doucette's been on the ballot a million times, and somehow he hasn't won. Dwayne Statz has been on it many times. Somehow he hasn't won. I really feel for those guys. But then when I finally got the call, I got real excited and also nervous. And I go there for the weekend to the Otesaga Hotel, and step out of the car, and only Hall of Famers can stay there that weekend, and some A-list celebrities. Now, Billy Crystal's there in the lobby, and Tom Brokaw, and a whole bunch of Hall of Famers. Ernie Banks is sitting there talking to Billy Williams, and Whitey Ford and Jim Bunning are huddled up at a table. It was crazy. And then, I go to my room, and Reggie Jackson is taking towels off the maid's cart, and crazy stuff like that. It was like I had sneaked into some private club and got away with it. It's like, what am I doing here with all of these guys? And then it was great. I made in the speech, which was at Doubleday Field. It was before they'd moved it to the Opera House. It was at Doubleday Field. Right. So there were a lot of Hall of Famers behind me. There had to be 40 or 50 Hall of Famers sitting behind me. And, I'm nervous as hell. And as I'm walking up to the podium, Gaylord Perry, who had played for us and who I knew, I could hear him say, "Hey, Eric, this better be quick." It was great. And then
go ahead.
I had one line in there. A bunch of my friends from Brooklyn came up, and we were all huge Sandy Koufax fans growing up because he lived in the neighborhood. And I had a line in the speech where I said, and thanks to all my Brooklyn friends for showing up. And I'm sorry I couldn't get Sandy Koufax autograph for all of you or any of you. As soon as the speech was over, Sandy came up to me and he said, "How many autographs do you need? I'll sign anything you want."
Wow.
And that was the greatest thing that happened to me all weekend. It was fantastic.
That is so great. Well, I got to tell a Gaylord Perry story, even though it's way off the topic. But Dwayne Kuiper, who should be in the Hall of Fame as a broadcaster, told me before his first home start as a rookie, this is Dwayne Kuiper, and Gaylord Perry is pitching. And Gaylord goes to his teammate, Dwayne Kuiper, and says, "If you make an error behind me tonight, you will never play another effing game for this team. Do you understand that?" And that's what he said to Dwayne Kuiper before his debut at home behind Gaylord Perry. So when Gaylord Perry, who Eric knows, a very underrated pitcher in his own right, they made a statue of Gaylord Perry outside of the Giants ballpark. And I have a picture of Dwayne Kuiper going like this to the statue. Eric, does that sound like Gaylord Perry to you? You covered him, right?
No doubt. Yeah, for sure. For sure. He would glare at guys when they made an error. And you don't see anybody doing that anymore.
No, my goodness, that's so forbidden. Absolutely.
Listen, Eric, I have a question because I heard you break out a little bit of a Spanish accent right at the top of the interview. And my dad commonly makes a joke that the biggest mistake in his life was taking French in high school and then going to be a baseball writer.
Me too.
Once Eric Gagne left, he was really in some trouble.
Right.
But here, 60% of players are speaking Spanish or something like that. And you, if I'm not mistaken, have called at least one inning, many innings in Spanish, correct?
I have, yeah. And I took French also because we were told that colleges would look on it more favorably.
Really?
And I grew up in New York City, with like 5 million Latinos at the time. But I learned French, which helped me a little bit in hockey. Every hockey team I broadcast for had one or two French Canadian guys, but they did speak English. It's not like I needed to speak French to them. But when Ruben Sierra came to the big leagues in 1986 and was immediately the Rangers' best player, we couldn't talk to him. Teams didn't have translators back then, and he didn't speak English. So I would have to find Jose Guzman, who was the only bilingual player on the team, anytime I wanted to talk to Ruben. And, Jose had other things to do. He wasn't always available to translate for me. So I decided I better start learning Spanish because the Rangers, they had Pudge Rodriguez on the way. They had Juan Gonzalez on the way. They had a whole pipeline now in Puerto Rico and Venezuela where Luis Rosa, the famous Spanish-speaking scout, was signing players. So I started taking Spanish lessons, and eventually I got to the point where I was pretty good. And Luis Mayoral, who was our Spanish announcer, would work alone when the team was on the road. And Luis was a chain smoker. He could not make it through an entire baseball game without smoking a cigarette. So he said, hey, what do you think about the idea of you doing a half an inning on the Spanish network every game while I go and, take my break and, have a dart and go to the bathroom. And I said, all right, these are the words I need. And I made a long list of baseball words, to translate. And he gave me the translations. I memorized them. And I started doing a half inning a game in Spanish. All of which was fine until one day in Cleveland, while Louis was out smoking, there was a huge argument over whether a home run was fair or foul. It was one of these balls that had gone over the foul pole. And everybody's out on the field. Both managers are out on the field screaming at the umpires. And now I'm no longer having to do just play-by-play. Now I'm having to explain something that's happening using complex tenses and other forms of grammar that I'm completely ignorant about. It had to sound like, Chico Escuela, trying to broadcast the baseball game in English. But the crowd went absolutely crazy. So Louis came running in with a half-smoked cigarette. He comes running in out because he realized at this point something's going on that I probably can't explain.
Right, you can't just use strike, ball, warning track, fair, foul.
And everything in play-by-play, everything's in present tense.
Right.
You're not using a lot of different tenses. Everything's in present tense. And but I actually did that for a couple of years. Wow. And it expanded to me doing a full inning per game. Louis got a longer break. And then eventually they started taking the Spanish broadcast more seriously, and they actually hired a partner for Louis, and they didn't need a gringo like me butchering the language anymore. But it was really fun for a couple of years. And in the travels I've done in Latin America to Cuba and Venezuela, Mexico, Puerto Rico, the Dominican, I've been invited to do an inning in a couple of places in Spanish. And that's been a real thrill for me. And one day, Francisco Romero, who does the Astros in Spanish, invited me to do an inning in Spanish with them. And that was really fun, broadcasting on the Astros Spanish network.
So cool.
That is so great to go way back with you. Now, Eric, you said something about just what a atmosphere the Rangers had when you were the broadcaster and when I came there as a beat writer. Jeff, it was amazing. People from the Dallas-Fort Worth area would come to spring training every year and spend like a week with the team. Eric, you remember that. Those things never happen today, right?
Exactly. There was a whole group. There was a bar everybody would go to after the game called Hank's, which was maybe a half a mile from the ballpark. And you'd go in there, and it was the same people were there every night. It was, ball players and a nucleus of fans who were in there with the players. And the players would be tending bar. I remember my first time I went there, Pat Putnam was tending bar. And the bar had to lose hundreds of dollars that night because he was just giving beers away, just pouring drafts for whoever he felt like it. But, nobody cared. It was a great time. And then eventually that moved to Smackos, which was owned by Joe Macco, the Rangers clubhouse manager and equipment manager. And Smacko's became the place where everybody hung out after the game. You still have your Smacko's basketball warm-up jacket. That is great.
I do. Smackos was the greatest. Back to Pat Putnam for a minute, Jeff. Pat Putnam used to like to get into the whirlpool, like a single whirlpool, and then he would go under the water in the whirlpool and then come out like a gigantic whale coming out at SeaWorld. Eric, did you ever see him do that?
Exactly, and they held a hot dog up over the water, so he was like a whale coming out and grabbing a fish. He would come out and grab a hot dog and disappear under the water and eat the hot dog. No bun, just the hot dog.
Right, Jeff, this is when covering baseball was so much fun.
Right.
Like Eric said, the players didn't make $1 zillion there. They actually connected with us. I told Jeff the story not too long ago about Steve Comer, who was on the 82 Rangers, who somehow found Dawn Wells, Marianne from Gilligan's Island. He somehow found her phone number and called her one night, like late, and she was so honored that someone found her. And then she realized he was drunk at the time, and she said, "I gotta go now." But Eric, those things never exist anymore, but they existed all the time with the Rangers.
It was crazy. And those guys, they had off-season jobs back then. I remember Tommy Dunbar was a substitute English teacher back in his hometown. And he was not the guy I would have chosen as my choice to score highest on a grammar test. Another super nice guy, but I'm not sure he was totally qualified to be an English teacher.
I had to show the greatest restraint ever when I once asked Tommy Dunbar, like, "What do you do in the off season?" He goes, "I'm an English teacher." I almost laughed out loud, but I stopped because it just was one of those things. All right, so Eric, tell Jeff about the Smackos basketball team that we had. Jeff, back then, Tom Grieve, the farm director / general manager, there were clubhouse guys. Eric played, I played, writers played. We had a Smackos basketball team. Eric, you remember?
I remember, and Tim was obviously the best guy on the team, and ran the team. And I hadn't played basketball in a few years and was just an absolute lummox out there, unable to do just about anything. And then, there was the day that I showed up late. The game was already going on, and somebody pulled a muscle or something, and they put me in the game, and I immediately got fouled. Hadn't taken any warm-ups or anything. And it's like I wanted to decline the penalty.
I don't need the shots.
Yeah, no thanks. And I smashed a couple of shots off the rim, and no, I did not make the shots.
Right. Those days just no longer exist anymore, Jeff. And I really miss the Laughing Fish Pub at, the Holiday Inn in Pompano Beach. And Eric, explain to Jeffrey and all of our listeners how bad the spring training facility was at Municipal Stadium in Pompano Beach compared to what we have today.
Yeah, it was called Municipal Ballpark. They didn't even make believe it was a stadium. It was Municipal Ballpark. The players referred to the field as Iowjima because of the number of landmines in it. One year, the Rangers' number one prospect, Mike Richard, who they were touting as a possible, batting champion one day, he got hit in the face on a bad hop. It broke his cheek, and it pretty much ruined his career. He never developed into the kind of player that we all thought he would because he got hit by that bad hop. And it was really hot. And Bobby Valentine would work on the field. When he became the manager, he would actually go out and work on the field himself, trying to make it a little safer for the players. It was terrible. But, when you mentioned the Laughing Fish Pub, the first thing that came to mind was Charlie Huff breaking his finger in the Laughing Fish pub, shaking hands with an old buddy of his who was a judge in Fort Lauderdale. And Charlie was from Florida, and the guy came up to see him, and they did this big handshake, and Charlie broke his finger and missed the first couple of months of the season. And the Rangers had to, I think Mike Smithson wound up starting on opening day because that's the way the rotation fell if Charlie wasn't able to make the start. Smithson was a rookie, and he wound up starting on opening day for us because Charlie broke his finger doing a handshake with an old buddy in the Laughing Fish.
Right. So, Eric, when I got the beat writer job in 82, I go to Pompano Beach, never been there before in my life. I pick up a map to figure out how to get to Municipal Ballpark. This is 1982, and I find it, and it's down at the bottom of the map, and it says, home of the Washington Senators, who had moved 10 years earlier, and they still hadn't updated the map to home of the Texas Rangers. Does that sound normal to you, Eric?
There was nothing at all normal about that. And back then, too, again, the players, they weren't in the kind of condition they're in right now. The bars in Fort Lauderdale were open till 4 a.m. in Pompano and Fort Lauderdale. And I would regularly see players out in the bars, with me at 2 and 3 in the morning. And then they'd have to be there. I didn't have to be there early in the morning like they did. The games were at 1 or 1:30. But those guys would have to be there like at 8 or 9 a.m. And they were out in the bars at 3 in the morning, looking to have fun.
Yeah. And Jeff, one of the players told me that at Municipal Ballpark, which was, again, had a little field and the stadium field, and that was it. They had a running track there. That's how the pitchers got their running in, was running a special track. And one of the pitchers told me he found a shortcut where he didn't have to run. He could sit on a park bench for like 3 or 4 minutes while everyone else was running, and then he would join them when they came by. Eric, does that sound like spring training 1982 to you?
Well, I remember they didn't have a gym. They didn't have any sort of a workout room. The exercise bike was on the concourse of the stadium,
right?
Which wasn't much, but you could see the stadium. And I remember Charlie Huff being on the bike when he broke his finger and he couldn't pitch. He would do his work on the bike every day on the concourse. And I went over I had something I wanted to talk to him about. And he was on the bike smoking a cigarette while he was doing the exercise bike. And you don't see much of that anymore either.
No, you don't.
Jeff, it was so much fun back then. And God, I loved Al Oliver. And that was my first spring training. Like Eric said, they made as it turned out, two terrible trades. But the Al Oliver trade came like right before the start of the season. Larry Parrish and Dave Hostetler showed up. I'll never forget. And I love Al Oliver. Please don't take any of this the wrong way. I had to do a story with Al on like looking ahead to the Rangers season. So I said, Al, you can just talk to me and I'll write it. And he said, no, I'll write it myself. I'll bring it to you tomorrow. So this was a preview of the Rangers 1982 season. And the first sentence was, my father died when I was 5 years old. And and it was actually really well written, but it was not a preview of the season. Does that sound like Al Oliver to you, Eric?
Yeah, it sounds like Al. And, I remember the Rangers played a game at the Superdome in New Orleans at the end of spring training. And that was the first time I think we actually saw Mazzilli and Larry Parrish, who they had gotten for Al Oliver, play a game. And I remember that the way the field was laid out, the goalposts were on the field. They were in play.
Jeff, that was the first time I'd ever been to New Orleans, and I asked the other beat writers who were really experienced at a lot of things, including drinking beer, and I said, what's it going to be like in New Orleans? And they looked at me and they said, you are going to stay up all night. That's what it's going to be like. And I think for the only time in my life, I stayed up all night in New Orleans because everyone else was. It was incredible.
Wow.
So, Eric, you've been through all this crazy stuff, okay? But then you get to the World Series with this team for the first time the team has been there 2 years in a row. So this is difficult, I know. But what was going through your mind when the Rangers should have won the World Series in 2011 against the Cardinals, but didn't? What were you thinking at that point, having covered the team for that long, coming this close and not completing the job?
Yeah, I was so, afraid really that I would screw up the call. So I actually wrote down a few things that I wanted to say as part of the call if they actually won. And they were, when they got to the point where they were 1 out away and 1 strike away, I had this little note in front of me so that, when I made the call, I'd remember to say this, I'd remember to say that. And then when David Freese hits the fly ball that, Nelson Cruz didn't catch, and the Cardinals tie the game, I crumpled it up and I fired it down on the floor underneath the counter. And then in the 10th inning, Josh Hamilton hits the home run in the top of the 10th inning, and I go crawling under the counter to find that piece of paper. It's all crumpled up, and I write really badly anyway, and I open it. I can barely read the thing, but I'm ready to go now for the final out again. And then it doesn't happen. Lance Berkman gets this lucky little bloop hit in the center and ties the game. I chucked it under there again. Never to be found. And that was just, it was horrible. Just a horrible feeling. And you knew how the Ranger fandom felt after all of those years, 40 some odd years at that point, not having a champion and coming so close and not doing it. And I honestly felt, that was my chance. I was very fortunate. I got to broadcast 2 World Series, the one in 2010 where the Rangers lost to San Francisco and were not really all that competitive in the series. And then 2011 when they should have won. And I figured that's it. I had my chance. I'm grateful to have done a couple of World Series. And then when the Rangers got there in 2023, quite unexpectedly, I thought this is a real Cinderella story here. And I wasn't going to get ready for a call like I did the last time. I figured I jinxed it the last time. But on the day of Game 5, when the Rangers, Game 5, pardon me, when the Rangers had a chance to win, and I really felt they were going to win. They had Eovaldi pitching that night. We were really confident. I did an interview with somebody that day who was asking me, the same sort of questions. What's it like for you after all this time? And it dawned on me, I really believe we're going to win the World Series today. This can't possibly be true. I must be dreaming. And I thought that's something that all the Ranger fans have to be thinking, that this can't be real. They must be dreaming. And I grabbed a piece of note paper from the Arizona Biltmore where we were staying, and I just scribbled down on it, you're not dreaming. And I stuck that in my wallet. And then in the top of the 9th inning, when Marcus Semien hit the home run, to give the Rangers a big lead, I pulled it out of my wallet and I put it down on top of my scorebook and said to myself, don't forget to say you're not dreaming, because that's what everybody's going to be thinking. And so when I made that call, I managed to get that in and, didn't screw up the rest of it. And now, when different things happen for the Rangers, they flash up on the video board, you're not dreaming. And people, ask me to sign baseballs and write, you're not dreaming on it. And it's become kind of my legacy, where for all of these years, my legacy was as the bearer of bad news. And then finally the Rangers won, which gave everybody a whole lot of satisfaction and gave me this call that now everybody here is in love with.
It's become a rally cry, and you wrote it on a piece of paper, and it didn't jinx the team, which is great.
No. And then we auctioned off the piece of paper, and we got over $1,000 for the piece of paper and the headset that I was using, and raised some money for charity.
I have a question that's a little more personal. to you and my dad's relationship. So in my little home studio here, you can see above my head, hence what my dad was pointing at. That's me. It's a painting done by my mother's mother, so my maternal grandmother, and it's a painting done of me and my paternal grandfather, my dad's dad, who I was named after, but I was named after his nickname, Jeff. But you never called my grandfather Jeff, right? You called him by his real name.
Yeah, his Armenian name.
Yes.
You would always
Which I
call
can't
him.
remember.
His name was Badrig, and we got such a kick out of it because Badrig used to visit with my mother, Joy, all the time in Texas. When Eric was living 400 yards from our house, they were there all the time. So Eric met my mother and father a lot of times. When my dad died in 2003, I got a call from Eric, and he said, I'm so sorry, Badrig died. And he was the only guy, because he always used my father's name, Badrig, back then. Sorry, it's been a long time, Eric, since we've talked about pop here. But this whole podcast, my whole career is based on my father and his love for the game. So this whole thing, and Jeffrey, this is all about my dad. And that's a picture of Badrig over Jeffrey's head there.
That's fantastic. I love it.
And Eric, I have to let you off the hook here. You know, my dad and I, most of our guests, right, know him very well. They go way, way back. And my dad looks at me and he goes, you have to ask him about Pop, because he always called him Badrig, and I know he's going to remember.
You know, I just turned 75, and there are some serious holes in my memory. There are, you know, it's really weird the stuff you can remember, details of games I went to when I was 7 years old. But the stuff that slips my mind, which is mostly names, it's a little frustrating.
Yeah, well, Eric's memory is amazing. And unfortunately, so is mine on a lot of levels. But Jeff, when I was living around the corner from Eric, I would ask him, like, where do we go get pizza? Where do we go get Chinese food? Henry Chang's or Henry Chen's or whatever it was. I still remember that. But I remember asking Eric, give me a movie I should watch that I haven't seen that you really like that not everyone has seen. And the answer was Searching for Bobby Fischer. The great movie about the chess prodigy. I probably watched that movie 50 times, maybe more. I know every line from it. And this was just another suggestion by Eric that made my life better. Do you remember when you used to tell me, go watch this movie, it's great?
Sure. And I still do that with people when I see something that I think they need to see. I remember, sending a lot of people to see Searching for Sugar Man, which wound up winning the Documentary Academy Award one year. It's about a singer named Rodriguez from Detroit who is completely unknown in the United States, but becomes this incredibly huge star in South Africa without ever having set foot in South Africa. And if anybody's never seen that movie, you got to check it out. Searching for Sugar Man is the name of it. Great music in there too. Rodriguez is the singer. You can find his stuff on Spotify and iTunes and all those places too, if you just want to hear the tunes.
Very cool. Right. Eric, you have no idea how much Searching for Bobby Fischer has been immersed into my childhood at this point. I remember we were moving my sister into an apartment for a summer in New York City when she was an intern. And I showed my dad that there's a thing called YouTube, and you can look things up on YouTube. You can look up videos. And I kid you not, I've never told this story, 3 years on the podcast. Dad figures out what YouTube is, and the first thing he says to me is, pull up the scene from Searching for Bobby Fischer when the dad talks to the teacher. Think about the world of all of the videos in the history of the world, all of the baseball highlights, and he says, pull up that scene. He is better at this than anything you'll ever be in your entire life.
It was those were the days. All right, Eric, before we let you go, 2 months ago, I had lunch with, among others, Nolan Ryan. And then that night, I had dinner with, among others, Dwight Gooden. So in one day, I had lunch and dinner in person with 8,007 strikeouts. Nolan was so incredibly great. His recall was amazing. We all know what a kind man he is, what a funny man he is, what a charming man he can be. And he, by the way, he told us a story about when he was the club president for the Astros, that a young intern came in with, lying with all sorts of books in hand and all sorts of information, and says, in 2 weeks, I'm going to know everything that you know about pitching. That's what the intern said to 65-year-old Nolan Ryan. But instead of being offended, which he should have been, he just laughed it off. What was it like for you, Eric, to cover Nolan Ryan for his entire time while he was a Texas Ranger?
It was amazing. It was the first time the Rangers had anybody who, people around the country really wanted to see. It was the first time we had autograph seekers lined up outside the hotel, when the team would arrive, to check into a hotel. And the thing with Nolan was, no matter what time it was, he would get off the bus and he would sign autographs. And he would usually sign for everybody who was there who wanted his autograph. And there would be times after a game where people would come up near the bus in the other cities. And, they can't do that now. You can't get anywhere near where the bus is. But I remember at County Stadium one day in Milwaukee where the bus was just parked in the parking lot and people could get up real close to the bus. And, Nolan was one of the first guys out of the clubhouse. He hadn't pitched that day. And he stopped to start signing stuff. And he had on a sport jacket. It was a road trip. We wore sport jackets back then. And he signed while we were waiting for all the other guys to get on the bus, probably another 20 minutes. He signed for that entire time. Meanwhile, these other players, infielders batting .215, are walking past the autograph seekers, just completely blowing them off, getting on the bus, while Nolan Ryan is out there, on a 90-degree day in his sport jacket, signing autographs. And I remember him getting on the bus, and his sport jacket had Sharpie marks all over the sleeves. And people were just kind of grabbing stuff and pushing stuff at him. And he just, calmly signed them all. And the greater experience for me, obviously watching him pitch was unbelievable. Got to see him do his 300th win and his 5,000th strikeout, right, and his 6th and 7th no-hitters. But more impressive to me was what he was like when he was our team president for 5 years. And we actually worked for him. I had a detached retina in 2009, and I couldn't work for a couple of weeks. And I remember Nolan calling me and said, when are you going to come back? And I said, well, I think I'll be back on Friday, but the doctor told me I have to wear a patch over my eye. And I'm very self-conscious about that. And I'm also, I'm a little worried that I won't really be able to see well enough. But the big thing is that, everybody's going to laugh at me. I'm walking around, look like a pirate, something like that. And Nolan said, don't worry about it. It'll be all right. And when I walked in on Friday and went into the press dining room, everybody in the press dining room was wearing a patch over their eye.
Jeez. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Nolan had gotten patches for everyone to wear in the press dining room, so I wouldn't feel so uncomfortable walking there with a patch over my eye.
Do you know that story,
That's
Dad?
the kind of guy.
I have never heard that story before. And this is Eric, his recall is just unbelievable. I know I've told this story before, but they once asked Rance Mullenix what the world would be like if everyone was like Nolan Ryan. And he famously said, everyone would love each other and no one would get a hit. That kind of sums up who Nolan Ryan is, isn't it, Eric? I mean, Eric, yeah. you called his 2 no-hitters, like you said, and his 300th win, and his 5,000th strikeout. I mean, you will never forget those moments for the rest of your life, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, especially the 5,000 strikeout, because I was doing the middle 3 innings then. Mark Holtz was our lead announcer. I would do the 4th, 5th, and 6th inning. And I was just lucky enough that the 5,000 strikeout fell in one of my innings. It was the first time I ever got to make like a really big call. And I remember the call was played on the Today Show the next day, and my parents got to see it in New York. It was before you could listen to a game, anywhere in the country. And it was the first time they'd actually heard me, on a broadcast network outside of coming to Texas to listen to the games. And that was really cool for me, the 5,000 strikeout. It was Ricky.
Ricky. Gosh, yes, Ricky. I should have known that.
Yeah. Ricky was also 4,998. And then he went through the lineup another time, striking out only one guy, and got to Ricky again and got him for 5,000. It was almost as if he had wanted Ricky to be the 5,000.
Right.
Jeff, ask your final question if you have one. We've kept Eric for an hour. He's going to Cuba. How many times have you been to Cuba?
I've been there a lot. I've watched a lot of baseball down there. I've spent a lot of time talking to their announcers, practicing my Spanish, learning Spanish down there. And right now things are very, really dire down there. They don't have any fuel. They don't have power more than 12 hours a day. So people's food is spoiling in refrigerators. And, I've got some friends down there, and I'm going to go down there. I have a suitcase full of food that I'm bringing, which is non-perishable stuff like tuna fish in packets and peanut butter and oatmeal. And, there's a few families down there who I'm close to from all of my trips, down to Cuba. And I'll be bringing a bunch of stuff down for them, going to some community centers and talking to people and talking to announcers and seeing just how dire the situation is, because it really sounds bleak.
Well, that's amazing what you're doing, and we won't keep you much longer. I just want to ask one last question, because those who listen to the podcast know that on April the 20th, my dad hinted at the all 420 team that he put together, and you had messaged him saying, "Can you just send me the list, because I'd love to see it."
Eric, am I supposed to know what 420 means? Because I didn't know what it meant. And then our pal Bill Flanagan sent in the all 420 team. I looked at it like 10 times and I said, I don't even understand what this is. And then you needed to see that list, that team, Tim. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Wanted to see it. And Bill Flanagan's a friend of mine, and he's extremely clever and smart, and I loved it. Off the top of my head, I thought, Justin Smoke's got to be on there. But then he went so deep on that. It was phenomenal.
Oh, that was just another poor pop moment where he just doesn't understand how the world works. But to sum this all up, Eric taught me so well how the world worked. When I got to Texas in '82, I didn't know anybody there. I didn't know anything about Texas. Famously, when I went to the Dallas Morning News for the first time, 1981, I walk in to the newsroom at the Dallas Morning News. And you remember Harless Wade, Eric,
Sure.
he used to be at Harless Wade looks at me when I walk into the Dallas Morning News office for the first time. He looks at me and he goes, "You must be the new guy." And I said, "Yeah, I am." He says, "You are the smallest goddamn Yankee I have ever seen in my life." That was the first guy I met when I walked into the Dallas Morning News. So I was lost. I was away from home for the first time. I didn't know what to do. And Eric helped me with places to eat, things to do, movies to watch. And Eric, all kidding aside, thank you so much for helping me get through my life, especially early on. And mostly, thank you for joining us today and making us laugh for over an hour here. This is ridiculous.
This was so much fun. Thanks for having me.